The plate was always on the left. Eleanor Mercer set it there the first Sunday after Anna left, and she never moved it after that. Left side of the table, across from her husband Gerald's place, beside the window that looked out over the backyard where Anna used to sit on the steps in summer with her shoes off. The plate was part of the good set, white with a thin blue border that Eleanor's mother had brought from Ohio in 1954. Eleanor had 8 of them. She used 3 every Sunday, one for herself, one for Gerald, one for Anna. Gerald watched her do it the first Sunday and did not say anything. He watched her do it the second Sunday and said her name in a careful way. Eleanor said she knew. She kept doing it. By the 4th Sunday he had stopped watching. He sat in his chair and unfolded his napkin and passed the bread when it was time to pass the bread, and they ate their Sunday dinner the way they had always eaten it, with the clock on the sideboard marking the half hours and the window going slowly dark, and the third plate across the table holding nothing. That was 1987. Eleanor Mercer kept setting that plate for 22 years. Anna had been 24 years old when she left. Not left in the way of a young person leaving for college, or for a job, or for the ordinary geography of a life being built somewhere new. She had left in the way of a door closing, a specific and deliberate closing that Eleanor had heard in every room of the house for weeks afterward. A sound she could not locate and could not stop hearing. The argument had been about a man. That was the simple version, and simple versions are always incomplete. But that was the center of it. A man Anna had chosen and Eleanor had not trusted, and Gerald had quietly agreed with Eleanor about, while saying nothing useful to either of them. The man's name was Paul. He was 31 years old, and Anna was 24, and Eleanor had seen something in the arrangement that frightened her in the precise way that mothers are frightened by things they cannot fully articulate. She had articulated it anyway, at length. On a Sunday, which was the particular cruelty of it, the day that had always been their family day, the day of the good dishes and the clock on the sideboard, and Gerald's bread rolls that he had been making from the same recipes since 1962. Anna had said things back. Not untrue things. That was what Eleanor carried longest. Anna had said things back that were not untrue. Things about being managed and not trusted, and the particular loneliness of being loved in a way that required you to stay small. And Eleanor had heard them, and had not been able to unhear them, and had also not been able to stop arguing because stopping felt like agreeing, and she could not agree with something she believed was going to hurt her daughter. Anna had left that evening. She had sent a letter 3 weeks later saying she needed space and time and that she hoped Eleanor understood. Eleanor had written back immediately. She had not heard from Anna again, not for a long time. Gerald Mercer was 61 years old in 1987, and he had been married to Eleanor for 34 years. He was a man who understood the architecture of a long marriage, the way a builder understands a structure he has lived in for decades, where the weight was carried, which walls could come down and which could not, which silences meant one thing and which meant another. He understood that the plate was not about Anna coming. Eleanor knew Anna was not coming. She was not a woman who confused herself about practical realities. She knew the plate was empty and would be empty, and that setting it changed nothing about the situation in any measurable way. The plate was not about expectation. It was about refusal. Eleanor Mercer was refusing to let Sunday dinner become a table for 2. She was refusing to let the ordinary domestic architecture of her life rearrange itself around Anna's absence as though the absence were permanent and accepted and built into the structure now. She was holding the space. Gerald understood this. He also believed it was going to keep Eleanor from healing in a way that would eventually cost her something important. He sat across from the empty plate every Sunday for the first year and felt that belief getting stronger. By the second year, he had stopped looking at the plate directly. He looked at Eleanor instead, at the way she served Sunday dinner with the same care she had always used. The good dishes, the folded napkins, the bread rolls in the basket covered with the blue cloth. He looked at her face during the meal, which was composed in the way Eleanor's face was always composed. A composure that he had learned in 34 years of marriage was not the same as peace, but was what Eleanor wore instead of peace when peace was not available. He said nothing about the plate that second year, or the third. He told himself he was giving her time. The letters began arriving in the spring of 1989. Eleanor was in the garden on a Saturday morning when the first one came. Gerald was in the kitchen. He heard the mail slot and went to the front door and picked up what had come and stood in the hallway with the envelope in his hand. Anna's handwriting. Their address in Anna's careful printing. No return address. He stood in the hallway for a long time. Through the kitchen window he could see Eleanor in the garden, kneeling at the edge of the flower bed with her gloves on, her back to the house, unhurried and absorbed in what she was doing. He thought about calling her in. He thought about what her face would do when she saw the envelope. He had watched Eleanor's face for 36 years. He knew what hope did to it. The particular brightening, the slight parting of the lips, the way her whole body seemed to lean slightly forward as if towards something. He had loved that expression his whole marriage. He had also watched what happened to Eleanor's face when hope did not deliver what it promised. He thought about the argument, about the weeks after, about the sound of Eleanor moving through the house at night when she thought he was asleep. He put the letter in his coat pocket. He went back to the kitchen and made coffee. He told himself he would give it a day, that he would think about it, that he was not making a permanent decision. He put the letter in the box on the shelf in the garage that he used for things that needed attention later. Eleanor came in from the garden at noon with dirt on her gloves, and he made her a sandwich, and they ate at the kitchen table and talked about the garden and what needed doing in the back corner and whether the weather would hold through the week. She did not ask about the mail. He did not mention it. The second letter came in July, a birthday card, he could tell from the size and shape of the envelope. Eleanor's birthday was the 14th. He put it in the box. The third letter came in November, plain envelope, thin. A note, probably, or a short letter. He put it in the box. By the end of 1989, there were 4 envelopes in the box. He had not opened any of them. He told himself this was because opening them was not his right, that they were Eleanor's letters and Eleanor's business, that he was simply holding them. He did not examine too closely why he was holding them rather than giving them to her. He understood, in the way that people understand things they are not ready to face directly, that he had made a decision in the hallway in the spring and that the decision was still operating even though he had never consciously renewed it. He put a second box in the garage for 1990. Eleanor never asked about the mail. This was the thing Gerald had not anticipated and could not fully explain to himself afterward. He had expected, in those first months, that Anna would also write to Eleanor directly, that Eleanor would receive a letter and he would be faced with the thing he had been avoiding and would have to make a real decision rather than continuing to manage a situation he had not properly defined. But Anna, it seemed, wrote only to the shared address. Or perhaps she wrote to Eleanor personally, and Gerald intercepted those too, and did not let himself distinguish between them. He was not certain, later, which was true. Memory had a way of smoothing over the details that a person preferred not to examine.
What he knew was that Eleanor never mentioned receiving a letter, and Eleanor never mentioned not receiving one. She set the plate every Sunday. She tended the garden. She called her sister in Columbus on Tuesday evenings.
She worked at the library reference desk 3 days a week until she retired at 65. She was, by any external measure, a woman who had accepted a difficult situation and continued her life. Gerald watched her accept it. He kept adding envelopes to the boxes in the garage. He moved them twice, once when they repainted the garage, and once when they reorganized the shelving. And each time he moved them, he thought about the weight of the box and the years it represented. And he thought about Eleanor's face, and he put the box in its new location and did not open it. The clock on the sideboard had been a wedding gift. A mantel clock, dark wood, with a face of cream-colored enamel and brass hands that Eleanor wound every Sunday morning before she set the table. It kept good time. Gerald had taken it apart once in the early years to clean the mechanism, and had put it back together correctly, which had surprised him because he was not a man who was good with small, precise things. The clock marked the Sunday dinners the way it had always marked them. 1/4 past, 1/2 past. The soft, double note at the hour. Eleanor listened for it. Gerald had noticed this early in their marriage, and it had stayed true for 50 years. She would pause whatever she was doing when the clock struck the hour, and listen to it complete itself before continuing. He had asked her about it once, and she had said she just liked knowing what time it was. He had accepted this, but he did not think it was entirely true. He thought she liked the interruption. The small insistence of the clock that time was passing and worth marking. After Anna left, the clock took on a different quality in the Sunday dinners. Each hour marked was an hour of the meal that had passed, an hour of the empty plate on the left side of the table, still there, still unclaimed, still clean. Gerald learned to hear the clock differently in those years. He heard it marking duration, how long it had been, how many Sundays had accumulated behind them. By the time they had been doing this for 10 years, he had stopped counting Sundays. The counting had become too large to hold. He wound the clock every Sunday morning instead. He made sure it kept good time. It was the least he could do. She made enough food for 3 people every Sunday. Not approximately, not a little extra in case someone dropped by. Enough for 3. She had cooked Sunday dinner for 3 for so many years before Anna left that the proportions were simply built into her now, her hands knowing automatically how much to make, her eye calibrated to a table set for 3. Gerald ate his portion. Eleanor ate hers. The third portion sat in serving dishes on the table and then went into the refrigerator on Sunday evening and became Monday's and sometimes Tuesday's lunch. He never said anything about the food. He had learned, in the 3rd or 4th year, that the food was not something he could say anything useful about. He had tried once, gently, suggesting that they could cook a little less, just the 2 of them. No need to make such a production of it every week. Eleanor had looked at him. She had not said anything. He had not raised it again. The Sundays accumulated. The refrigerator held its weekly cargo of thirds. The clock marked the hours. The plate stayed on the left. There were things Eleanor said about Anna over the years, and things she did not say. She said Anna's name easily, without the particular careful quality that people use when they are managing a wound. When she mentioned her to her sister or to friends at the library, she said Anna the way she said any name, as part of the ordinary landscape of her life. She was not performing normalcy. The name simply did not catch. What she did not say was that she was waiting. She did not use that word about herself. She did not tell Gerald she was waiting for Anna to come back. She did not say she believed it would happen. She said she hoped. She made the distinction clearly when her sister pressed her once, on a Tuesday evening phone call that Gerald overheard from the hallway. She said hope was not the same as expectation. She said she was not expecting Anna on any particular Sunday. She was just leaving the door open. Gerald heard this from the hallway. He stood there for a moment. Then he went into the other room. He thought about the boxes in the garage. He thought about them in the specific way he had learned to think about them over the years, which was quickly and at a slight angle, the way you look at something bright without looking directly at it. He did not let himself follow the thought all the way to its end. He told himself Eleanor was managing. He told himself he was helping her manage. He went to bed. It was 1997. 10 years in. A Sunday in October, the kind that comes in that particular shade of gold that belongs only to October in that part of the country, the light arriving at a low angle through the kitchen window and lying flat across the counter where Eleanor was working. She had started the roast at noon. The potatoes went in at 2. By 3, the kitchen held that smell, the Sunday smell, which was different from the smell of food on any other day of the week in a way she had never been able to explain, but that was completely real to her. It was the smell of a specific kind of time, unhurried, set apart. She moved through the kitchen the way she moved through all her routines, efficiently and without fuss, her hands knowing where things were without her having to think about it. The good dishes were in the upper cabinet. She stood on her toes slightly to reach them, the way she always did, though she would not always be able to. She counted out 3. She carried them to the table. She set Gerald's place first.
Fork on the left, knife and spoon on the right, the way her mother had taught her. Then her own. Then she crossed to the left side of the table and set the third place. She smoothed the tablecloth where it had ridden up slightly. She folded the napkins. 3 of them, the good linen ones with the small embroidered border, into precise rectangles. 1 beside Gerald's fork, 1 beside hers, 1 beside the third plate. She stepped back. She looked at the table for a moment. There was a question she had stopped allowing herself to ask directly, sometime in the 4th or 5th year. The question was whether any of this was helping, whether the plate accomplished anything, whether hope that received no information for years remained hope or became something else, something with no useful name, an orientation rather than an expectation. She had stopped asking the question, not because she had answered it, but because the asking had started to feel like the wrong instrument for the situation. You did not ask whether love accomplished anything. You did not ask whether it was helping. Love was not a strategy. It was a description of what you were. She was a mother. Anna was her daughter. The plate was on the left. She went back to the kitchen and checked the roast. By 5 o'clock, the light through the window had changed from gold to the pale gray of early evening in October. Eleanor lit the 2 candles on the sideboard, the ones she used only on Sundays, short white tapers in the brass holders that had been a gift from her sister. The clock read 5:15. Gerald came in from the living room when he heard her moving the serving dishes to the table. He sat in his chair. He unfolded his napkin. He looked at his plate. He did not look at the plate on the left. Eleanor sat down. She served the roast. She served the potatoes and the carrots, and she put Gerald's portion on his plate and her portion on hers, and she placed the serving dishes in the center of the table where a third person could reach them. Gerald reached for the bread basket. He passed it to her.
She took a roll and passed it back. The clock struck the half hour. Eleanor paused for a moment, the way she always paused, and listened to it complete itself. Then she picked up her fork. They talked about the week, about the furnace, which had been making a sound, about her sister, who had mentioned coming for Christmas, about the book Eleanor was reading, a biography she had brought home from the library. She talked and listened and passed things when they needed passing, and the candles burned down slowly in the brass holders, and the plate on the left sat clean and unclaimed through the meal, the way it always sat. She was not performing anything. She was simply at the table. This was what the plate required of her. Not grief, not drama, not even active hoping, which would have been exhausting to maintain across 10 years and 10 years more after that. Just presence. Just the refusal to let the table become something smaller than it was. At some point in the 6th or 7th year, she had understood that the plate was as much for herself as for Anna, that it kept something in her organized correctly, that it prevented the slow interior rearrangement that happens when you allow an absence to become an absence accepted, when you let the missing person's chair be moved and their things be put away and the table reset for fewer people. She was not going to reset the table. Not yet. Not while there was still something to hold open. After dinner, she covered the serving dishes with plastic wrap and put them in the refrigerator. Gerald washed up. The clock wound down the evening the way it always did. She blew out the candles. She picked up the third plate from the left side of the table. She washed it carefully, the way she washed all the good dishes, by hand, and dried it with the good cloth, and put it back in the upper cabinet with the others. She would take it out again next Sunday. She always did. The boxes grew. By the mid-90s, there were 4 of them. By 2000, there were 6. Gerald organized them carefully, each one labeled with the year, stored on the highest shelf in the garage behind the things they used only occasionally, the camping equipment from when the children were young, the extra folding chairs for parties. Anna's frequency had changed over the years. In the early years, she had written 4 or 5 times annually. By the late 90s, it was 2 or 3. Gerald sometimes thought this meant she was giving up, which was both a relief and something else he did not name. By 2003, it was once a year, sometimes twice. A card at Christmas, occasionally a letter in spring. She never stopped entirely. Gerald had thought she would stop eventually. He had told himself in the early years that this was a temporary situation, that Anna would move through her anger and move on, and the letters would stop, and the situation would resolve itself without anyone having to make any further decisions. Anna did not stop. She wrote for 22 years. 41 letters and cards in total by Gerald's count, which he made only once, late in Eleanor's illness, when he was trying to understand the full size of what he had done. 41. He stood in the garage with the boxes open around him and counted the envelopes, and then sat down on the step stool and put his head in his hands. 41 times Anna had reached toward her mother. 41 times he had stood in the hallway or at the mail slot and made the same decision. He sat in the garage for a long time. Then he went inside and sat with Eleanor, who was in the living room with the television on low, smaller than she had been a year ago, quieter, her hands in her lap. He sat beside her and did not say anything. She leaned slightly toward him the way she had always leaned slightly toward him when he sat close. He stayed there until she fell asleep. Eleanor Mercer died in January of 2009. She was 81 years old. The illness had been gradual and then fast, the way these things go, and she had managed it with the same composure she had brought to everything difficult in her life. She was in the hospital for the last 2 weeks. Gerald was there every day. On the last Sunday, he asked the nurse if he could bring something from home. He brought the plate. The white plate with the blue border from his mother-in-law's set. He set it on the tray table beside Eleanor's bed, and she looked at it for a long time without speaking. He did not explain it. She did not ask him to. She reached out and touched the edge of it with 2 fingers, the way she had touched the edge of the table every Sunday when she set it, a small, confirming gesture, making sure it was properly placed. She died on a Tuesday, 4 days later, in the early morning, while Gerald was in the chair beside her bed. He drove home in the gray January light. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he went out to the garage. He had known, for years, that he would eventually have to open them. He had told himself he would do it when Eleanor was gone, that the decision he had made in the hallway in 1989 had an end point, and the end point was this: that he owed it to the full picture to know what was inside before he decided what to do next. He carried the boxes into the kitchen one by one. He made coffee. He sat at the table where they had eaten Sunday dinner for 50 years, with the clock on the sideboard and the window looking out at the backyard, and he opened the first envelope. Anna's handwriting. He had not seen it in 22 years. It was still recognizable, slightly different, changed by 2 decades of a life he had not witnessed, but recognizably hers. He read slowly. He had a lot to read. The first letters were careful in the way of someone who has said hard things and knows it, and is trying to find the way back without pretending the hard things were not said. Anna wrote about the argument without minimizing it. She said she had been unfair in some of what she said. She said she understood that Eleanor had been coming from love. She said she needed to find a way to be her own person, and she hoped Eleanor could understand that without taking it as a rejection. She did not apologize for Paul. Gerald noted this. He understood it. Paul had turned out to be, by the evidence of the later letters, a decent man. Anna had married him in 1991. The card that arrived that year was a wedding announcement, plain and small. No invitation because Anna had not known if it was too much to hope for. But an announcement, a record, "We wanted you to know." Gerald set that one aside. He picked up the wedding announcement and read it again. It was a small card, cream-colored, the kind you order from a stationer in a box of 50. Printed simply, Anna Louise Mercer and Paul David Whitmore, June 14th, 1991, Columbus, Ohio. June 14th, Eleanor's birthday. Gerald sat with that for a long time. He did not know if Anna had chosen the date intentionally, or if it was coincidence, or if Anna herself had known what she was doing when she chose it. He suspected she had known. He suspected that somewhere in Anna's decision to marry on her mother's birthday was a thing she could not say directly, a reaching, a way of keeping Eleanor inside one of the most important days of her life, even when Eleanor could not be there. Eleanor had spent that birthday the way she spent all her birthdays in those years, quietly. Gerald had taken her to dinner at a restaurant she liked. She had worn the blue dress. He had not known, sitting across from her that evening, that their daughter was getting married 4 hours away. He set the card down. He opened the birth announcement. It was also a card, handmade rather than printed, the kind a person makes themselves with colored paper and careful lettering. Anna had always been good with her hands. The lettering said Clara Ruth Whitmore, born March 3rd, 1993, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Clara Ruth. He looked at the middle name for a long time. Ruth had been Eleanor's mother's name. He set the card down very carefully on the table, as if it were fragile, which it was not, which he understood even as he did it. He set it down as though something depended on doing it gently. Clara Ruth. Named for Eleanor's mother. Named to carry something forward. Named the way people name children when they want to say, "I have not forgotten where I come from." When they want to say, "You are still in this even if I cannot find the way to tell you directly." Anna had been telling Eleanor something with that name. Eleanor had never heard it. He opened the photograph that had come with the card. A small square print, slightly faded now with age. A baby's face, round and new, eyes not yet focused on anything in the world. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about Eleanor in 1993, what she had been doing in March of 1993 while this baby was being born 4 hours away. She had been at the library 3 days a week. She had been tending the garden. She had been setting the plate every Sunday. She had become a grandmother and not known it. He put the photograph face down on the table. He sat there for a while without reading anything. Then he picked up the last letter in the stack, the most recent one, 2008, a few months before Eleanor went into the hospital. He had intercepted it from the mail in October, the same as all the others, and put it in the box without opening it, and there it had stayed until now. He unfolded it. It was short, half a page in Anna's handwriting, which had become smaller and more compressed over the years. The handwriting of a person who had learned to say things in less space. It said, "Mom, I don't know if you read these. I don't know if you want to hear from me after so long. I've stopped trying to understand the silence. I just know I can't stop writing entirely, because stopping would mean something I'm not ready for it to mean. Clara is 15 now. She plays clarinet in the school orchestra. She has your eyes, Mom, or what I remember of your eyes. I've been looking at the photograph we have of you for so long that I sometimes worry I'm remembering the photograph more than the person. I hope I'm not. Paul is well. I am well. We're in the same house. The address is below if you've lost it. I think about you on Sundays. I don't know why Sundays particularly. I just do. I hope you're all right. Anna." Gerald folded the letter along its original creases. He sat at the kitchen table with the clock on the sideboard and the window going dark in the January afternoon, and he thought about Eleanor in October of 2008, 3 months before she went into the hospital. She had been slower by then. He had noticed it without naming it. She had been quieter. She had still set the plate every Sunday. She had still wound the clock. She had still been there, at the table, on the Sundays when Anna was thinking about her. He thought about that. 2 women, 4 hours apart, thinking about each other on Sundays. He placed the letter on top of the stack. He read about the wedding he had not attended, about the child born in 1993, a girl named Clara. The birth announcement, a card with a small photograph, a baby's face, round and unformed, Eleanor's grandmother's eyes that Gerald could see even in the small photograph. A grandchild. Eleanor had never known she had a grandchild. He sat with that for a long time. He read about Clara growing up in pieces, a birthday card that mentioned she was walking, a Christmas letter that said she had started school and was doing well, a letter from 2001, longer than most, in which Anna described a parent-teacher conference and what the teacher had said about Clara's reading,
and how it had made Anna think of Eleanor, who had worked in the library all those years, who had loved books the way other people loved people. Anna had been thinking of Eleanor all this time. She had been sending these records of her life into what she must have experienced as silence, because Eleanor had not written back, because Eleanor could not write back to letters she did not know existed, and Anna had kept sending them anyway. The later letters had a quality that the early ones did not. They were quieter. Not defeated exactly,
but changed by the years of silence in the way that a person is changed by speaking into a room and hearing nothing come back. There was less explanation in them, less effort to account for things or justify choices. They were more simply dispatches, records. This is what is happening in my life. Clara is 13 now and plays the clarinet. Paul retired last year. We moved to a smaller house in the same town. I'm attaching the address in case you want it. She always included the address, every letter, every card. The address was there, a small, precise note in Anna's handwriting, in case you want it, as if Eleanor might have forgotten where to find her. Eleanor had not forgotten. Eleanor did not know the address existed. Gerald stacked the envelopes in chronological order on the kitchen table, all 41 of them. He sat back and looked at the full row. 22 years. A wedding, a child born, a child growing up. A life lived and recorded and sent faithfully to a woman who set a plate every Sunday and never stopped hoping and never knew the hope had something to reach for. Gerald sat at the table for a very long time. The clock on the sideboard marked the hours. He was not a man who had ever thought of himself as capable of cruelty. He thought about this in the days after he read the letters. He thought about it carefully and honestly in the way he had tried to think about most things in his life, without the self-justification that made hard truths soft and manageable. He had not thought of himself as doing something cruel. He had thought of himself as protecting his wife. He had watched Eleanor after Anna left. He had watched her at night and in the mornings and at Sunday dinners with the empty plate. He had made his calculations based on what he observed, which was a woman in genuine pain, managing that pain through structure and ritual and the composure she wore instead of peace. He had decided, standing in the hallway in 1989 with the first envelope in his hand, that giving Eleanor that letter would give her hope. And that hope, in Gerald's calculation, would open Eleanor to the possibility of disappointment again. And that the disappointment, if it came, if Anna reached out and Eleanor reached back and Anna withdrew again, would be worse than the original wound. He had been trying to protect her from a second wound. He had not considered, standing in that hallway, that he was also removing her choice. That Eleanor was a grown woman who had managed 60 years of her own life before Gerald decided she needed protecting. That the letter in his hand was not his to manage. He had not let himself consider that. He understood now why he had not let himself consider it. Because the moment you consider that, the thing you are doing stops being protection and becomes something else. And Gerald had needed it to be protection. He had needed the story he was telling himself to be true, because the alternative was a story he could not live in. He sat at the kitchen table with the clock marking the hours, and he let himself consider it now that Eleanor was gone. Now that it was too late for consideration to change anything. He sat there for a long time. He called Anna on a Thursday morning. He had found a phone number in one of the later letters. He had not known, until he opened the boxes, that Anna had been calling them for years too, leaving messages that he had erased before Eleanor heard them.
He had discovered this reading a 2004 letter in which Anna mentioned having called twice without an answer and hoping they were all right. He had erased those calls. He had forgotten he had erased them. He sat with that for a day before he called. The phone rang 4 times. A woman answered. Her voice was 50-something, cautious with unknown numbers. Gerald said, "Anna, it's your father." There was a silence. Then Anna said, "Dad." Just that. Just his name. The word containing 22 years of things that could not be put into a single phone call. He said, "I have to tell you something. I need you to understand that I am going to tell you all of it, and I am not going to make it smaller than it is." Anna said, "Okay." He told her.
He started in 1989 in the hallway, and he went all the way through to the boxes in the garage and the kitchen table and the 41 envelopes laid out in chronological order. He told it plainly. He did not use the word protection until the end, and when he used it, he said, "I told myself it was protection, and I need you to know that I understand now what it actually was." Anna did not say anything for a long time after he finished. He did not try to fill the silence. Finally, she said, "Did she know? Did Mom know any of it?" He said no. Anna said, "So she thought I never wrote?" He said, "Yes." Another silence. He said, "She set a plate for you every Sunday, for 22 years. He said, "I want you to know that she never stopped." Anna made a sound that was not quite a word. He said, "I know this is not enough." He said, "I am not calling because I think telling you fixes anything. I am calling because you deserved to know the full picture, and I am the only one left who can give it to you." Anna said, "I have to go." He said, "I understand." She said, "I'll call you back." He said, "Okay." He sat with the phone in his hand after she hung up. The clock on the sideboard said 10:30. Outside the window, the backyard was gray and still in the January cold. He thought about Eleanor in the garden on a Saturday morning in 1989, kneeling at the flower bed with her gloves on, her back to the house, unhurried. He thought about what her life might have looked like if he had called her in from the garden that morning. If he had met her at the door and said, "There is a letter from Anna." He thought about her face, the particular brightening. He could not know what would have happened after that. He had told himself for 22 years that he knew, that the outcome would have been bad, that Eleanor would have been hurt again, and that the hurt would have been worse than the original wound. He did not know that. He had never known that. He had decided he knew. There was a difference. He sat with the difference until the clock struck 11, and then he got up and washed his coffee cup and stood at the window for a while. He thought about Anna keeping the address current in every letter, in case you want it. All that time, just in case. Anna came in March. She drove from Columbus with her husband Paul, who was a quiet man with steady hands, who shook Gerald's hand at the door and did not say too much, which Gerald respected. Clara came too. She was 15 now, tall like Anna had been tall, with a directness in her face that reminded Gerald of Eleanor in a way that was difficult to look at directly. They sat in the living room, which Gerald had not changed since Eleanor died. The same furniture, the photographs on the mantel, the clock on the sideboard, still wound, still keeping time. Anna looked at the room for a long time before she sat down. She said,
"It looks the same."
Gerald said most of it is the same. She said she hadn't been in this house and she was 24 years old. He said he knew. They sat with that for a moment. Clara was looking at the photographs on the mantel. She picked one up. A photograph of Eleanor in the garden, mid-70s, laughing at something off camera, her gloves in one hand, and a look on her face that was purely Eleanor. Clara said, "Is this her?" Gerald said yes. Clara said she looks like my mom. Anna looked at the photograph from across the room. She said yes, she does. She said it the way you say something that has been true for a long time, and you are only now allowing yourself to say it out loud. Gerald made coffee and they sat at the kitchen table, the four of them, and he told them more. Not what he had already told Anna on the phone. The other things. The Sunday dinners, the plate, the folded napkins and the clock and the food that went into the refrigerator every Sunday evening and became Monday's lunch. Anna listened with her hands around her mug. Paul sat beside her quietly. Clara listened in the way teenagers listen when something is registering more deeply than their expression shows. When Gerald finished talking, Anna said, "I kept writing because I didn't know what else to do." She said, "I thought if I stopped it would mean I had given up." She said, "I didn't want to give up." Gerald said, "I know." She said, "I thought she was choosing not to respond, that she had decided she was done with me." He said she never decided that. He said the plate was there every Sunday. Anna looked at the table. She put her hand flat on the surface of the kitchen table, the way Eleanor had put her hand flat on the plate in the hospital, a small, confirming gesture. She sat like that for a moment. Then she said, "I want to see the plate." Gerald got up and went to the cupboard. He brought the plate to the table and set it in front of her. White, thin blue border, her grandmother's set, one of 8. Anna looked at it for a long time. She did not touch it. She said, "She set this every Sunday." He said yes. Left side of the table. She said, "For 22 years." He said yes. Clara reached across and put her hand on her mother's arm without saying anything. Paul looked at the window. The clock on the sideboard marked the quarter hour. Anna sat with the plate in front of her until the clock marked the half. Then she said, "Okay." She did not say it to anyone in particular. She said it the way you say a word when you are finally taking the full weight of something and deciding to carry it rather than continue to stand outside it. Gerald said, "Okay." They sat together in the kitchen in the March light, and the clock kept time the way it had always kept time. Outside, the backyard was still. The garden beds Eleanor had kept for 40 years were waiting for spring. Someone would have to decide what to do with them. Not today. Today they sat at the kitchen table. The plate was on the table. The clock marked the hours, and in the room where Eleanor Mercer had cooked Sunday dinner for 50 years, the people she had loved sat together for the first time, held by the particular gravity of everything that had been lost, and everything that had, in some form, quietly survived. Nobody said anything for a while. There was nothing to say that the room was not already saying. The clock struck noon. Outside the window, the yard was very still. The plate sat on the table between them, white with its thin blue border, catching the March light. It had been waiting a long time. It could wait a little longer. Clara asked to stay an extra day. Paul drove home Sunday morning for work, and Clara stayed. She was 15, and she had her mother's directness, and she spent Saturday afternoon in the backyard looking at the garden beds, walking the perimeter the way Eleanor had walked it every spring. Gerald watched her from the kitchen window.
She came inside at 4 o'clock with dirt on her shoes and sat at the kitchen table and said, "Can you tell me more about her?" Gerald sat down. He told her about Eleanor at the library, 3 days a week for 20 years, her particular gift for finding the right book for the right person. He told her about the clock, how Eleanor had wound it every Sunday morning before setting the table, how she paused whenever it struck the hour.
He told her about the garden, what grew where, what Eleanor had planted the year they moved in, and what she had added decade by decade. The slow accumulation of a person's preferences made visible in a yard. Clara listened and asked questions, not the careful questions adults ask when they are managing what they receive, the direct questions of someone who wants to know. She said, "Did she talk about my mom?" Gerald said, "Yes. Not constantly, but yes." Clara said, "What did she say?" He thought about how to answer honestly. He said, "She said Anna had always known her own mind, from when she was very small, that she had her own idea of how things should be, and she held to it." He said, "Your grandmother said that like it was something she was proud of, even when it was hard." Clara was quiet for a moment. She said, "My mom is like that." Gerald said, "I know." She said, "Is that where she gets it from?" He said, "I think so." He said, "I think a lot of things pass between mothers and daughters that neither of them can fully account for." Clara nodded slowly. She said, "I'm glad she kept the plate." Gerald looked at her. She said, "Even though nobody came, even though it was just sitting there, I'm glad she didn't put it away." He said, "Me too." He meant it completely. He had not known until that moment that he was going to mean it completely. He had spent 22 years watching the plate and believing it was keeping Eleanor from healing. He had used that belief to justify the boxes in the garage. He had told himself the plate was the problem, and he was protecting Eleanor from extending the problem into the future. Sitting across the kitchen table from his granddaughter, who was 15 years old and had Eleanor's eyes and Anna's directness, and had driven from Columbus with her parents to sit in a dead woman's kitchen and ask to hear about her, Gerald understood something he had not understood before. The plate had not been keeping Eleanor from healing. The plate had been holding the door open, and the door had needed to be open, because Anna had been on the other side of it for 22 years, writing letters into silence, keeping the address current in case you wanted, holding her own door open in the only way she had. Eleanor had not known. Anna had not known. Eleanor did not know. Gerald had been standing between them, not maliciously, not in the dark, conspiratorial way of a man who wants to cause harm, in the quiet, convinced, self-deceiving way of a man who has decided he knows what is best for the people he loves, and has let that conviction do things he would not have permitted himself to do if he had called them by their right names. He had called it protection. He should have called it fear. His own fear, not Eleanor's, his. He had been afraid of watching Eleanor hope and be disappointed. He had been afraid of what that would do to her and, underneath that, of what it would do to him to watch it. He had placed his fear inside a story about Eleanor's vulnerability, and he had lived inside that story for 22 years, and it had cost 3 women something they could not get back. He understood this now. He was not sure understanding it served any purpose, but he understood it. He took Clara to the library on Sunday morning before Anna came to collect her. The library had changed since Eleanor's time. New shelving, a children's section that had been redesigned twice, a row of computer terminals along the wall where the periodicals used to be. But the reference desk was in the same place. A woman in her 60s sat behind it with glasses pushed up on her head, dealing with a patron's question about local history. Gerald stood with Clara at the edge of the reading room. He said, "Your grandmother stood behind that desk for 20 years. Clara looked at the desk. She said, "What did she do there?" He said she helped people find things. He said she was very good at knowing where things were. He said people would come in not knowing exactly what they were looking for, and she would ask them a few questions and then she would know. Clara said, "That sounds like her." He said, "Did you know her?" She said, "No." She said, "Just from what Mom told me. And from today." She looked at the desk for a moment. She said, "Mom doesn't talk about her that much." She said, "I think it hurts too much." Gerald said, "I think you're right." She said, "Do you think they would have made up if things had been different?" He considered this honestly. He said, "I think so." He said, "I think they were both holding the door open." He said, "I think they would have found their way through eventually." Clara said, "But they didn't get the chance." He said, "No." She said, "Because of the letters." He said, "Yes." She said, "Because of what you did." He said, "Yes." She said it without accusation. She said it the way you state a fact that is simply true and needs to be stated. He said, "Yes, because of what I did." She nodded. She looked at the reference desk a moment longer. Then she said, "Okay." "Okay." She said it the same way Anna had said it at the kitchen table, taking the weight and deciding to carry it. She said, "Can we go back? Mom's coming at noon." He said, "Yes." They walked back through the winter morning. The town was quiet, bare trees, a few people on the sidewalk bundled against the cold. Clara walked beside him with her hands in her pockets. She said, "I want to come back, in the summer, to do the garden." He looked at her. She said, "If that's okay." She said, "I want to learn what she planted and where." She said, "I don't want it to just be overgrown." He said, "It's okay." She said, "I never got to know her." She said, "This is the closest I can get now." He said, "The closest can be enough sometimes." She said, "I hope so." They walked the rest of the way in the comfortable quiet of two people who have said what needed saying and do not need to fill the space after. Anna came at noon. She stood in the doorway for a moment before coming in, looking at the house the way she had looked at it when she arrived, taking in the fact of it, the unchanged quality of it, the way it still contained Eleanor in every room. She came in. She stood in the kitchen. She said, "I've been thinking about what you told me." Gerald said, "I know." She said, "I'm not going to tell you it's all right." She said, "I don't know yet if it is." She said, "I need more time with it." He said, "I understand." She said, "I know you thought you were protecting her." He said, "I know that's not enough." She said, "No." She said, "It's not enough." She said, "But I also know you loved her." She said, "I could tell that, even when I was angry, even in the worst of it, that you loved her." He said, "I did. I do." She said, "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She set the plate every Sunday." He said, "Yes." She said, "For 22 years." He said, "Yes." She looked at the table. at the place on the left side where the plate had always been. She said, "I want to take it." The plate. She said, "If that's all right." He got up and went to the cupboard. He brought the plate and handed it to her. She held it in both hands. White, thin blue border, 1 of 8. She looked at it for a moment. Then she wrapped it carefully in her coat and held it against her chest. She said, "She's going to set it at her table." He looked at her. She said, "On Sundays." She said, "I know that might seem strange." He said, "It doesn't seem strange." She said, "Clara wants to come back in the summer for the garden." He said, "She told me." She said, "Is that all right?" He said, "Yes." He said, "The garden needs someone." She nodded. She looked at the room one more time, at the clock on the sideboard, at the window and the gray winter yard, at the table where her mother had set 3 places every Sunday for 22 years, refusing to let the ordinary architecture of her life rearrange itself around an absence she had never accepted. Holding the door open, in case. Just in case. Anna said goodbye. Gerald said goodbye. She walked out to the car where Paul was waiting. Gerald stood at the door and watched them pull out of the driveway and turn onto the street. He stood there until the car was out of sight. Then he went back inside. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he went to the cupboard and took out one of the remaining plates. White. Thin blue border. He set it on the left side of the table. He stood back and looked at it. The clock struck 1. He went to make lunch. The plate stayed where it was. It was a Sunday. Some things you keep doing because stopping feels like the wrong kind of ending. Some doors you keep open because you learned, too late and at too great a cost, that the person you love most needed them open. Some plates you set, not because anyone is coming, because they were always worth setting for, because the love was always real, even when the fear stood in its way. Because Eleanor Mercer had known something, setting that plate each Sunday in her good dishes, with the folded napkins and the clock on the sideboard, that Gerald had not understood until now. That hope is not the same as expectation. That leaving a door open is not the same as believing someone will walk through it. That some gestures are not about the future. They are about who you are. They are about refusing to let the absence become the whole story. And now, in a house in Columbus, a plate with a thin blue border sat on the left side of a table on Sunday mornings. And in the summer, a girl with her grandmother's eyes came to tend a garden she had never seen. And the door, which had been open all along on both sides, finally had people standing on both sides of it. Not together, not reconciled, but aware at last of each other, which was not everything, but it was not nothing. It was the most that love, blocked by fear and then finally freed from it, could manage, and it was enough to go on with. The clock struck the hour, the plate sat on the left, and somewhere in the ordinary quiet of a Sunday afternoon, Eleanor Mercer's kitchen held the shape of everything she had waited for. Not in the way she had hoped, but in the only way that was still possible, which, in the end, is how most true things arrive. Quietly, later than we wanted, but real.